The string quartet snapped mid-note when the groom bolted past the altar, and my heart tripped with them. Malik Hart grabbed my wrist like a man yanked from a ledge. Malik said, "Pretend to be my girlfriend for 3 minutes, please." The ballroom gasped as if the chandeliers inhaled. I smelled gardenias, panic, and money, trying to hide a mess. Vanessa's diamond flashed like a siren, and her mother's glare could cut glass. Tasha said, "Zara, don't you dare," but my name was already a headline in Malik's eyes. Malik said, "If you say no, I'll drown right here." His voice sounded like a locked door begging for a key. I remembered every time I swallowed my pride to pay rent, and I wondered what dignity costs in silk. Vanessa said, "Who is she?" like the words were poison she refused to spit. Cameras rose like vultures, and I felt feathers of shame brushing my skin. I said, 3 minutes, then you owe me the truth," and his grip softened into a promise he hadn't earned. We slipped through a service corridor that smelled like lemons and secrets, and my heels clicked like arguments I could not win. Malik said, "Kitchen exit," left, like he had practiced running from his own life. I asked what kind of man flees a vow wrapped in velvet. He said, "The kind whose choices were chosen for him." The hallway hummed with freezers and gossip, and a busboy stared like he had stumbled into a reality show. Tasha's texts pinged like tiny alarms in my clutch, but I ignored the chorus. Malik said 3 minutes again, and it sounded smaller than before. I said I'm not a magician, and he said he only needed smoke. My chest tightened because I knew smoke becomes stains if you breathe it too long. Somewhere behind us, the quartet found their tune like denial learning to sing. I asked what he'd promised Vanessa, and he flinched like the word promise had teeth. We reached a steel door, and the storm outside pressed its ear against it, hungry for witnesses. The steel door groaned like it hated choices, and rain slapped our faces with cold truths. Malik said, "Walk with me, and they'll follow the lie, not you." I said, "Lies love to collect interest." He laughed without joy, and called it a short loan. We crossed the loading bay where puddles mirrored crooked skies. A catering van idled like a getaway car that had lost its nerve. Tasha called, "Zara, pick up," from the phone's angry glow. Malik said, "Smile for the cameras if they catch us," and I told him my smile was closed for repairs. He said, "Then hold my hand," and the words felt like fire finding dry wood. I let our fingers lace because sometimes survival looks like intimacy. Sirens in my memory wailed at the thought, but my feet kept pace. The storm sounded like applause for a play no one paid to see. We ducked beneath the van's awning, and the rain quieted enough for truth to speak. Malik said, "My father built this wedding with other people's expectations." I asked where his own voice went. He said, "Into boardrooms that never heard it." The van's engine hummed like a tired lullaby, and steam rose from the grates like ghosts. I told him 3 minutes was almost up. He said, "Time bends when you're drowning." The word drowning softened my anger and sharpened my caution. I asked, "Why me?" And he said he saw me at the ceremony standing alone and unafraid. I almost laughed because alone sometimes masquerades as courage. He looked at our hands and said, "I won't let their story swallow you." Thunder rolled like a judge clearing his throat, and I wondered what verdict waited on the other side of the door. The door crashed open, and the wedding surged into the alley like perfume with teeth. Vanessa said, "Enough," and her voice sliced the rain. Reporters fanned out, hungry for ruin. Tasha appeared with an umbrella, eyes blazing, and said, "Zara, choose your exit." My name felt heavy in the air waiting to land. Malik stepped in front of me like a shield that had learned to bleed. Vanessa said, "You humiliated me," and he flinched like the word branded him. I said this was never my stage, but the cameras made liars of us all. Tasha said dignity first, and I felt the old ache nod. Malik said, "I started this," and his remorse rang clear against the storm. The alley held its breath, and I knew Act 1 would end with a choice that did not love me back. The storm eased into a drizzle, but inside me, The thunder hadn't stopped. Malik guided me to the back of the van, silence pressing harder than any crowd. He said, "Thank you for not letting me drown," and his voice cracked like old wood. I wanted to say he was a stranger, but his eyes made me feel remembered. Tasha climbed in after us, dripping rain, and hissed, "Zara, you're not a lifeboat for broken men." I said 3 minutes stretched too far, and Malik lowered his gaze like shame was a weight he'd carried for years. The van rattled into the night, streetlights streaking across windows like fleeting hope. Malik said, "I'll explain everything," but explanations felt like bandages over bruises that never healed. My chest ached with questions I didn't want answers to. The city blurred past, neon signs flickering like promises too bright to last. Tasha said, "You always dive where sharks swim," and I snapped that survival makes strange swimmers. Malik's silence filled the air heavier than the rain. He finally said, "I was raised to obey, not to choose," and those words bled into me. I saw a boy locked behind golden gates, learning to smile for cameras, but not for himself. My scars hummed at his confession, because my own choices were often hand-me-downs from pain. I said, "That doesn't excuse dragging me into fire," and he whispered that he never meant to. Tasha muttered, "Intent doesn't heal wounds." I leaned back, watching lightning frame the skyline, and wondered if fate always loved storms. We stopped outside my apartment, the van humming like it feared letting go. Malik said, "Just 5 minutes more," but Tasha cut him down, saying, "She doesn't owe you another breath." I watched his hands twist like ropes he couldn't untie. He said, "You don't know what Vanessa's family holds over mine." I replied, "Secrets don't make you innocent, just trapped." His jaw clenched, but his eyes softened with something close to apology. Tasha squeezed my hand, her warmth anchoring me, and whispered, "Don't let pity turn to chains." I stepped out into the night air, rain-scented and sharp, knowing his storm had already seeped into my skin. Malik stayed in the van, his silhouette hunched like a man losing both love and freedom. Inside my apartment, the quiet felt too loud. I dropped my clutch, and the thud echoed like judgment. Tasha poured wine, her stare unblinking as she said, "You looked at him like he mattered." I said he begged me with eyes, not lies. She shook her head, saying, "That man is a sinking ship." I sat by the window, rain trailing lines on glass, and whispered, "Maybe I've been water all along." Tasha softened, touched my shoulder, and said, "You deserve more than being someone's escape route." Her truth struck harder than Vanessa's glare had. I thought of Malik's trembling voice, and wondered if weakness could be a kind of honesty. Sleep tugged at me, but my chest stayed awake, heavy with storms I didn't invite. I woke to a knock that didn't belong to morning. My heart stuttered as I opened the door to Malik, rain dripping from his lashes like regret. He said, "I couldn't leave it unfinished," and the hallway light painted him in shadows. I whispered, "You shouldn't be here," but my voice betrayed the tremor inside me. He said Vanessa's family would crush him if he stayed, and I asked, "Then why run to me?" He looked at me as if my silence had once saved him, though we'd never met before today. Tasha stirred in the kitchen, muttering curses under her breath. Malik said, "I don't need saving. I need someone to see me." The weight of his words cracked something I kept locked tight. The storm outside answered with thunder. Morning dragged gray across my blinds, and Malik stood in my doorway like a question I could not dodge. He said, "Last night wasn't a performance to me," and my pulse argued back. Tasha set coffee down like a referee placing rules on the table. I said we were not a rescue unit for inherited disasters. Malik said, "I want to choose you in daylight, not panic." The words trembled like they had never been spoken in his house. My phone blew up with headlines, and his name braided with mine like a scandalous prayer. Tasha said, "If you care, protect her first," and he nodded as if learning a new language. I stared at his loosened collar and thought about softness becoming a trap. He reached for my hand, then stopped, and the space between us felt loud. I said, "Prove it without burning me," and he whispered, "Watch me try." By noon, a PR team colonized a corner booth at a hush restaurant, and I felt like a headline served with ice water. Malik said no spin without her consent, and the publicist blinked like he had broken a holy rule. Vanessa's cousin appeared uninvited, sliding in with a smile that cut. He said the families required a statement denying romance, and my chest cooled. Malik said, "We will not lie about her." And the cousin laughed softly like money never loses. I said my name would not be their ashtray. The publicist whispered about sponsors, stock, and a father who hates surprises. Tasha texted, "Don't let them shrink you." Malik reached beneath the table and laced our fingers, a dare in daylight. I inhaled the risk and tasted steel. The cousin said, "You're temporary," and Malik's jaw set like stone. The rumor wildfire found my job before I did, and my manager's voice wavered between concern and calculation. She said the board disliked attention that didn't pay rent. I said I had shown up early for years, and dignity was not bad publicity. Malik called and asked to meet, but I needed air, not promises. Outside, street vendors shouted over traffic like survival hymns. Vanessa stepped from a black car, flawless and furious, and said, "You stole a stage built for me." I said, "He ran to me, not from you." And the truth kissed ice. Her eyes glinted with the weight of many doors she could close on me. She said, "Walk away, and I'll forget your name." I said, "Names remember themselves." A camera flashed and my future blinked. Evening found me at Tasha's salon, where hairdryers hummed like aunties telling the truth. Tasha said, "Gossip is a storm, but storms pass," and clipped care into my ragged edges. A client murmured that fairy tales don't feed families, and I swallowed the sting. Malik texted a photo of a press note he refused to sign, the lie neatly typed. I felt pride and fear wrestle under my ribs. Tasha said, "If he chooses you, he chooses the fight that comes with you." I whispered that my love would never beg for air. She smiled sadly and said, "Then make him earn oxygen." Outside, sunset bled copper over the blocks, and the mirror gave me back a woman sharpened by weather. I said, "I'm not running," and the glass agreed. Night brought Malik to a rooftop where the city breathed under bruised clouds, and he said, "I told my father no." The wind carried the word like an uncovered flame. I asked what it cost, and he said, "Maybe everything I was promised." His eyes held fear and freedom wrestling. I said I would not be a rebellion that ends with me broken. He said, "Stand beside me, not behind me," and the words warmed my bones. Sirens sighed below like tired gods. I remembered Vanessa's threat and my manager's pause, and I tasted the tin of risk. He stepped closer, not touching, waiting for consent like it mattered more than oxygen. I said, "If we begin honest." He nodded, and the sky finally exhaled. Morning headlines bled with revelations sharper than knives. Malik's family had hidden debts buried under silk, and whispers said Vanessa's family bought their silence with vows. I read the words until my stomach turned heavy. Malik stormed in, saying, "They've lied about everything." His voice cracked, and I saw a man torn between inheritance and survival. Tasha said, "Secrets always cost more than truth," but I felt the floor shift beneath me. Malik's father called, voice booming through the phone like thunder. "End this foolishness, son." Malik said no, and it was a word that shook centuries. I wanted to believe him, but betrayal sat like smoke in my chest. I whispered, "What else are you hiding?" And his silence was louder than fire. That night, Vanessa arrived at my building dressed in ice. She said, "You think love makes you untouchable, but you don't know our world." Her words carried centuries of wealth sharpened into blades. I told her truth doesn't belong to one family. She smirked, saying, "Malik's debts are chained to my father's hand. Walk away or watch him drown." Her perfume lingered like smoke after gunfire. I wanted to strike her with words, but my silence was steel instead. She leaned close, whispering, "He didn't tell you everything, did he?" My pulse stumbled. I slammed the door, but her shadow seeped into the hallway. Tasha said, "She smells blood," and I realized maybe she wasn't wrong. Later, Malik confessed on the rooftop again, his breath fogging like ghosts. He said, "My father bet everything on a merger. Vanessa's dowry was the only rope left." My knees weakened with the weight of his truth. I asked, "So I was just your rebellion?" His eyes pleaded, "No, you are the only choice I made myself." My heart ached, torn between fury and tenderness. I said, "Your silence hurts more than your family's lies," and he flinched. The city below roared with indifference, cars and sirens like applause for ruin. Malik reached for me, but I stepped back into the cold. He whispered, "Don't leave me in their cage," and I wondered if love was just another kind of lock. Tasha warned me, love doesn't excuse deception, as she braided my hair like armor. I told her my heart wanted to forgive, but my dignity wanted blood. She said, "If he truly loves you, he'll fight without dragging you into the fire." My reflection in the mirror looked like a woman forged in storms, but inside I trembled. Malik texted, "Meet me tonight. I'll show you the truth." Tasha muttered, "Truth never waits until midnight unless it's dangerous." I clenched my jaw and said, "Maybe I need to see what burns before I walk away." My chest carried both hope and warning, and the mirror offered no answers, only a face that looked ready for war. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and secrets. Malik paced beneath broken skylights, whispering, "I can't keep this hidden anymore." A file sat on a crate, thick with contracts and debts. He said, "This is the empire they built on lies." My fingers shook as I flipped pages, seeing numbers that could sink kingdoms. I asked, "And they'll destroy you if this leaks?" He nodded, face carved with fear. Then footsteps echoed, and Vanessa's cousin stepped into the shadows, smirking. He said, "You shouldn't have brought her here." Malik pulled me close, shielding me, but I felt betrayal coil between us. The truth was finally naked, and it was uglier than love could cover. The warehouse walls carried every echo like a warning bell. Malik shouted, "This isn't your fight," but the cousin laughed, "It's already hers." I clutched the files, heart pounding louder than thunder. I said, "If truth burns us, then let it burn," and Malik's eyes widened. The cousin snarled, "You'll ruin dynasties," as if dynasties weren't already rotten. Malik stood in front of me, fists clenched, voice breaking. "I'm done letting them own me." My chest cracked open, anger and tenderness colliding. Tasha's words echoed, dignity before love, but love's fire refused to quiet. I whispered, "Then prove it here, not with promises," and he met my gaze like a man ready to bleed. The night outside roared, hungry for climax. The cousin lunged, trying to grab the files, and Malik shoved him back hard enough to rattle crates. He said, "You won't touch her," but the cousin sneered, "She's already marked." I pressed the papers to my chest like armor. Malik's voice thundered, "I'd rather burn than bend," and my breath caught at the finality of it. The cousin hissed, "Then you'll both fall together," as if falling was worse than chains. Rage turned Malik into something fierce, a man stripped of boardrooms and groomed silence. I said, "I'm not a spectator in my own life," and shoved the cousin's hand away. For a moment, the world shrank to 3 hearts beating war. Then the skylight cracked louder, and rain poured down like judgment. We burst from the warehouse into the storm, Malik pulling me by the hand. Sirens wailed closer, painting the night red and blue. He said, "They're coming for me," and fear twisted his face. I said, "Then let them see everything," and shoved the files into his chest. He looked at me as if I had placed fire in his hands. His shoulders straightened, no longer his father's son but his own man. Police lights flickered across puddles like stained glass. I whispered, "This is the moment you stop running," and he nodded, eyes fierce with new resolve. My lungs burned, but something inside finally loosened. Love and ruin braided together, and the storm cheered for neither. The police demanded answers, and Malik stepped forward with files dripping ink. He said, "This is the truth my family buried," and handed them over. Cameras flashed from somewhere in the dark, vultures circling for the story. Vanessa's cousin shouted, "You'll regret this," but Malik didn't flinch. I watched his spine straighten like a man reborn. He turned to me, whispering, "I only stand because of you," and I felt heat rise in my chest. Tasha arrived through the crowd, umbrella useless, yelling, "Zara, you better know what you're doing." I said, "For once I do." The storm carved lightning across the sky, as if heaven signed off on the chaos. The world tilted, but I stayed on my feet. Later, in a quiet precinct room, the storm muffled behind glass, Malik sat across from me, trembling but free. He said, "They'll strip me of everything but not you." I said, "Don't make me your last possession," and his eyes glistened. Tasha whispered, "Love is easy, but rebuilding is the test." Malik reached across the table, palm open, no chains, no commands. I stared at his hand, knowing it carried both fire and ruin. I placed mine in his, not as surrender, but as a vow forged in scars. He exhaled like a man finally breathing real air. Outside, the storm broke into silence, and the world waited for our next chapter. Dawn rinsed the city clean, but none of us felt new. Malik said, "I signed the statement and gave them every number," and the quiet after sounded like an emptied room. Tasha brewed coffee and said, "Now comes the living." I nodded because survival is louder when the sirens stop. My manager called and said, "Take a leave, not a dismissal," and relief stung like salt. Malik rubbed his temples, whispering, "They froze my accounts," and I heard a dynasty cracking. I said, "You're not currency to me," and his breath steadied. Tasha slid a stack of bills toward rent, muttering, "Community over scandal." Pride knotted my throat, but I accepted like a vow. Malik said, "Let me work, even if it's starting at the bottom," and I believed the muscle in his voice. The storm in us calmed, not gone, just tamed enough to listen. At the bank, the manager's smile was polished marble. She said, "Compliance holds remain until the investigation clears." Malik stood tall and answered, "Then release what's lawful today." His tone did not beg. I said, "We can itemize every account," and watched dignity do math. Tasha whispered, "Document everything," tapping her phone like a drum. The lobby hum felt like a hive deciding our fate. Malik's father called, voice gravelly with pride and regret, saying, "Son, step back and let me fix this." Malik replied, "You built the debt, I'll build the truth." The line went silent, like a curtain finally falling. I squeezed Malik's hand and said, "Paper trails are also redemption." He nodded, eyes clear as fresh steel. We left with partial access and a map for the rest, and hope felt almost spendable. We spent the afternoon at Tasha's salon, spreadsheets open between curlers and courage. Tasha said, "Numbers don't lie when people stop feeding them," and her scissors clicked like punctuation. Malik traced columns and murmured, "Here's where the padding starts." I highlighted entries until a pattern rose like a bruise. He said, "My father hid fear behind growth, and I heard a boy learning to forgive a man." I replied, "Accountability is love without perfume," and he swallowed hard. Clients listened, offering nods and side-eye prayers. Tasha added, "Community remembers receipts," and snapped a photo of each page. Malik smiled small, the kind that comes after bleeding. I said, "We'll deliver this to the auditors," and the page finally felt lighter in my hands. Vanessa asked to meet in a quiet chapel where candles held their breath. She said, "You took a future I was promised," and the pew creaked under her anger. I answered, "Promises built on chains are cages." Her eyes softened, then sharpened. She admitted, "I wanted the life more than the man," and the confession slipped like glass. Malik said, "I wronged you by silence," and she flinched at the honesty. Tasha stood in the back, a witness without judgment. Vanessa sighed, "My father will fight you both." And I said, "Let him fight the truth." She looked at the altar as if asking for a new script. We parted without forgiveness, but with fewer knives. The chapel door closed, and the candles flickered like cautious blessings. Night returned us to the rooftop where choices first learned our names. The city pulsed, but we stood still. Malik said, "I will rebuild with transparency and small beginnings," and the wind carried the vow clean. I said, "I will not be your oxygen, but I will breathe beside you," and felt my ribs unlock. He asked, "What do you need from me every day?" I replied, "Truth first, then tenderness, then time." Tasha laughed softly and said, "Put it in writing," sliding a pen like a ring. We wrote a simple pact on the back of a receipt, dated by moonlight. Malik kissed the air near my cheek, waiting, and I closed the space because consent is a door we open. The skyline blinked like witnesses who finally approved. Resolution did not sing, it hummed steady, like a heart that chooses to keep going. Morning light painted my apartment walls gold, but peace felt fragile. Malik brewed coffee like a man learning simple rituals, his hands steady at last. He said, "I woke without fear, and I tasted the newness of the words." Tasha leaned against the counter, teasing, "Don't let routine become your new lie." I laughed, soft but wary. Malik slipped a newspaper across the table, headlines naming frauds and debts that were not ours anymore. I whispered, "The world finally sees them." He nodded, replying, "Now they'll learn to see me too." My chest eased, but scars hummed a reminder. Storms don't vanish. They change shape. Still, his presence beside me felt less like a cage, more like a window. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, their microphones like spears. Malik walked beside me, jaw tight but stride steady. He said, "Today I testify, not as their son, but as my own man." I squeezed his hand and whispered, "Truth is armor." Vanessa passed us in silence, her eyes heavy with battles not yet lost. Cameras flashed hungry for collapse, but I lifted my chin and let them capture dignity. Tasha whispered, "This is history, not gossip," and I believed her. Malik stepped onto the stand inside, his voice firm, his lies burned away. The air shifted, and I realized survival had become witness. The world didn't own our ending, but it would record it. That evening, we returned to the neighborhood where kids chalked stars onto cracked sidewalks. Malik crouched down, showing them how to draw constellations. He said, "The sky belongs to everyone," and laughter rose like music. I watched his shoulders soften, the weight of legacy finally lifting. Tasha nudged me, saying, "See? Roots, not headlines." My throat tightened because this moment looked like healing. Malik glanced back, eyes finding mine, and said, "I want to build where joy lives, not where fear rules." I nodded, feeling the ache of believing again. The chalk dust clung to his hands like proof of rebirth. This wasn't a palace, but it felt more like home than any ballroom. Later, alone on the rooftop, Malik and I stood close enough to feel each other's breath. He said, "I can't promise riches, but I can promise honesty." My chest fluttered, scars whispering warnings, yet hope louder. I said, "I don't need palaces, I need peace," and the words felt like release. The skyline shimmered, city lights steady instead of chaotic. Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out nothing. No ring, just his open palm. He said, "Will you choose me without crowns?" My eyes burned, not from pain but from clarity. I placed my hand in his, whispering, "Yes, as long as we both keep choosing." Our silence after was not empty, but full. The story closed, not with applause but with breath. Malik whispered, 3 minutes turned into forever, and the words curled around my ribs like silk. I remembered the ballroom chaos, the hand that once felt like chains now steady as promise. Tasha's voice floated in memory, saying, "Dignity first," and I realized love had finally learned to honor it. Vanessa's shadow lingered somewhere in the city, but it no longer defined us. I said, "We are not their scandal, we are our own survival." Malik kissed my forehead soft as truth, and the night leaned in. Silence followed, not empty but holy. The final blow was not pain, but the haunting certainty that storms never leave. You just learn to dance inside them.